So tell me, Fred, do you think that affirmative action has actually worked?
What I've seen of it, it has. The reason why is because throughout history, the people at the bottom have always been suppressed. So now that they've gotten their chance to show what they're able to do, they've been given hope of some sort to be able to get out of that rut. It's just like affirmative action in sending people that are low income into these training centers. It's like saying, I'm going to give you a carrot and I want you to follow it. And then the government in turn takes away the carrot by taking away the funding away from all the certain programs that were allocated for low income people. But because affirmative action says you have the right to be at a certain job, it makes you feel better, because in other aspects you would never get that chance, because the man with the money is going to hire whoever he wants. And these people are never going to climb up the ladder because they're not the chosen few. So that's just how I feel about this affirmative action.
Thank you. Okay, can you tell us, in your opinion, has affirmative action worked?
I would say yes. And I think it's worked for lots of people, because it's such a broad law and it covers so many different areas, not just education and the workplace, but also ESL classes. You know, it's connected to transportation. It has a whole bunch of meanings. I think it's worked, and I think it needs to be worked on. I want to see more women women to get more than just to be promoted to middle management, which is really the scut job of the world. I know that things have improved for some groups and some people, but they haven't improved enough. And on the other hand, I'm not really sure that this method of leveling the playing field is the best we can come up with. I'm hoping we can come up with something a little more logical and less difficult to administer.
Okay. All right, do you think affirmative action has worked?
Absolutely not. I don't believe in affirmative action that it works, because I think it sets people up for stereotypes. I think that, like in the upper levels of employment, to meet their quota, they might hire one black person or one Asian person or one Hispanic person just to fill their quota. I don't think it really works for minorities, and it definitely doesn't work for women.
In what way have you found that it doesn't work for women?
I believe that women have to work twice as hard as the men do to get up to a higher level position. And so how could it work if we still have to work twice as hard and it's already in the 1990s?
Okay. So once we get there, we get stuck. We don't go higher and higher because the energy it takes is too much. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure about that. I don't think we have, affirmative action to me means that we have the same advantage as anybody else, and that's not true.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back. What did you hear? Anything strike you in particular?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is those three people very much represent the diversity of opinion, and you can tell there's some emotion in all three of those people because it is a very hot issue. And I think people need to realize it's not as simple as that it works or doesn't work. And I think they were all alluding to that. The first gentleman talked about the process of bringing hope to people. And that's one of the things I've always been in favor of as a career consultant, is if I can help people feel a sense of hope and connect that with taking some responsibility for themselves, then people can begin to move forward. The second woman talked about leveling the playing field. I'm not sure I totally agree with that we're ever going to create a level playing field. What I want to make sure we do through any programs we do is make sure that people can get onto the playing field and then have the tools and resources necessary to play fairly with one another. That may or may not be a level playing field, because I think we all know that there's never going to be any such thing in the real world of work as a level playing field. Certain people have other advantages over others, and I think that's always the way it's going to be. But if people have access to get onto the field, into the work, then they have the opportunity to show their skills, their resources, and what they're made of. And then the third person, I think what she was saying is that it hasn't worked. And I see that that's a very emotional reaction to it, because in some cases there is some real documented evidence that affirmative action programs historically have helped people. Particularly women have benefited from affirmative action programs. African Americans have benefited. We have a very strong African American middle class in this country that barely existed 25 and 30 years ago. And I think there's a direct link between affirmative action programs and that. But I do also think the process, as we've defined it now, needs some serious work, as I think one of them alluded to. It's the process was created in the late 1960s, and I think the reality of the 1990s is very different, both politically, economically, socially, and certainly the workplace itself is very different than it was 20 and 30 years ago.
Well, and some of the emotion and the fear that I hear when I talk to people about this has to do with kind of all or nothing. Well, if we don't have this, then we're going to go back to pre-1960.
Right.
You know, and that's where a lot of the fear is coming from, which is not trusting at the government or state level that we're going to be able to come to an approved answer. I mean, it's going to be, it's either going to stay as it is, or it's not going to exist at all.
Well, you've touched on one of my very favorite topics when I work with people, and that's sort of this either-or thinking. We tend, most human beings who've grown up in the society in the last 20 or 30 or 40 years tend to think it's either affirmative action or it's nothing. It's either Democrat or Republican, it's either black or it's white. The world that we're living in today is far too complicated and moving too fast to think like that. We need to teach ourselves and our customers and our clients and anybody we deal with, whether you call it affirmative action, that there needs to be a bit of both, in that we need to find ways to dialogue with both ends of the either-or and find some way to come to some common ground, which means, of all things, we need to start learning how to listen better to each other.
That's right, and work through some of that basic mistrust that I think takes place in any atmosphere where fear is present.
That's right, so we need to be able to sit down with each other, and very similar to what you and I are doing here, and just be willing to question and probe and not have to necessarily say, I know better than you do, but let me just hear what you have to say, and let's see what kind of sense it makes to me. And I have an opinion, and I hope you'll respect that too. And by the process of dialogue and listening and probing, I think we can come to a higher level of understanding of this very complex either-or.
Okay. So, you know, I think what people react to often is, verbal responses where if you question affirmative action and question whether it's working, then you're automatically then a racist. I mean, we're seeing this politically. I mean, that's what gets thrown, bandied back and forth, you know. So in terms of opening the dialogue, I think there needs to be some sort of safe forum to do that.
Exactly, and I think there needs to be not only a space for that, but people need to have time to do that. You know, given the fact that people feel so harried today just to get through their day, the last thing they want to do is sit down and have a dialogue about something that is so touchy and so difficult to work through, because intellectually it can be complex, emotionally we've seen just from 3 people here how it touches people's buttons. And you know, if you look out in the corporations today, it's very, very touchy, because there are a lot of people of diverse cultures working side by side, and a lot of times they really don't understand each other, and they're not taking much time to really try to do that.
Because we get so involved in our emotions. We do have a copy of the Civil Rights Initiative that's been proposed, and I do have a graphic prepared with at least the first point made in it, because I think it's important for our viewers to actually look at the wording, because that gets lost also, which is, it becomes my interpretation of what I think it's about. Let's take a look at this and take a quick reading. Neither the state of California nor any of its political subdivisions or agents shall use race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin as a criterion for either discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to any individual or group in the operation of the state system of public employment, public education, or public contracting. Okay?
Well, the first thing that strikes me is that the average voter is not going to understand a word of what was on there. And so all the political rhetoric we're going to hear, the political ads, they're going to be laden with emotion, and it's going to come down to either or. And I guess the suggestion I would have for people is read and reread this and ask other people what they make of it. Don't say, here's what I think. Just listen. What do you make of this initiative, and what sense do you make of this in affirmative action? And does it make sense in the way it's constructed, this initiative, affirmative action? Should it be changed? In which ways should it be changed? How do I personally feel about these kinds of programs? How do I feel about working and living with people who are different than me?
Yes.
How open am I to experiencing people who are different than me, and so on. And it takes real honesty. I'm not suggesting this is easy, which is one of the reasons why I get so emotional, but I think many people have a hard time opening themselves up to seeing and thinking and acting differently, and sometimes when they see somebody who's very different than they are, it just scares them.
That's right. That scares them. We do have another portion of the Civil Rights Initiative that I wanted to take a look at as well. Nothing in this section shall be interpreted as prohibiting classifications based on sex, which are reasonably necessary to the normal operation of the state system of public employment or public education. Now, I found this confusing. I don't know.
Well, I think it's very confusing too, but if you notice the last two parts of that are public education and the state government. Those are huge employers. They're probably, next to defense, probably among the largest employers in the state, and they provide a lot of opportunity. And part of what could be hidden in that initiative is a way to keep people out of those systems. And that's part of my fear is, while the intent is to say, let's clean up this process, there could be almost a backlash into these various systems and make it harder for people, again, as I said before, to get into these playing fields. And I think that would be absolutely wrong to do that.
Because we heard that kind of vague phrase, you know, reasonable classifications based, that's rather vague based on gender. I guess as a voter, I know I'd certainly want a little more clarity about what that means.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the political rhetoric is next year when this starts really hitting big time. I think people are going to start playing on our emotions. I think there's going to be all kinds of effort to confuse us rather than help clarify us. And again, I would encourage your viewers to really sit down very carefully, not only read the actual language, but call their own legislators, their local officials, their city council members, their county superintendents, and ask for their understanding of this and what it might mean. And try to get some people who have some experience in this to give them some guidance.
Okay. So as an expert in this field, and we're going to have to wrap up pretty quickly here, do you see hope for this issue? Do you feel like we actually will come to a place where we can somehow come to an agreement?
We may come to a place where we agree to disagree, because I think it's not only such an emotional issue, but I don't think there is an absolute right or wrong on this. Obviously, people have their opinions strongly held, and people have a right to their opinions. I think what we need to do is come to a place where it's okay to have dialogue on an ongoing basis, and we don't close our minds to hearing other people's opinions and ideas about the subject.
I want to thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Join us in the next few weeks as we explore phobias and aging parents. I'm Mary Crocker Cook, and this has been Bay Area Psychology. Good night.